It's
Okay, we are live. So,
all right. All right. We're tweeting. Hey, everyone.
hello. This is episode 14. Wait,
14.
14?
14.
14 of Death of the Roguelike.
14.
Um, I, I don't. Yeah, I'm Rob Parker.
I might be
I
Harrison Massey. I'm not sure today.
Yeah, you
Um,
may or may not be Harrison Massey. I am taking a break from my busy schedule of writing Lord of the Rings fan fiction. Specifically a rewrite of Waiting for Godot that depicts Glorfindel in the Peter Jackson adaptation of Lord of the Rings, hanging out in the prancing pony waiting for Frodo to show up, because in that trilogy, Arwen shows up and saves Frodo instead. So he is waiting for Frodo. This is the thing I'm actually doing.
we're okay. That's it. That's the show tonight. Good
Yeah,
night.
that's it. Yeah, just
All
shut
right.
it down.
Later. All right. Uh,
You're Harrison Massey. This is.
yes.
I'm gonna probably repeat a bunch of stuff this time around. I look forward to a time where I'm not repeating myself all the time. But
Yeah.
this
No, it's
is
fine. My
it's
brain is fried too. I've been hacking on the same thing on meh for like the past week and a half, and I am just gone.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, this is partially like this is a general thing that we are broadcasting, but it's also a video for an audience of one at the very least, and that is Dr. Neil Randall, who this is part of a project that I'm actually doing.
Oh,
This one episode is part of my final project.
I
Uh,
will. Maybe I'll behave myself. Um,
whatever. Part of it was me selling him on just like we're gonna stream this stuff, and part of that is thinking out loud and kind of reacting to games without necessarily coming in with a pre-built, perfectly formal argument to kind of go with that. So that's kind of where we're coming at here. The class that this is for is it's on Lord of the Rings and adaptations thereof. So for that course, we played Lord of the Rings online, and I finally hit level 30 today through farming for the most part. Which, by the way, Lord of the Rings online, if you were really into farming, that's a pretty good farming simulator.
like on like if Harvest Moon is like one,
Mm-hmm.
is like a value of one. Like how many Harvest Moons is Lord of the Rings Online?
It's probably a half Harvest Moon, because Harvest Moon really leans hard into the agrarian society, and then at a certain point, dungeon crawling. I think some versions of it.
Yeah, I think some of the later iterations.
I've ruined Factory on my 3DS, and
Yeah.
that seems delightfully strange. No, this it just if you were looking for experience points in that game, in Lord of the Rings Online specifically, farming is a good way to go. It's kind of relaxing. I I talked a lot of smack about that game in the class, but their music system and their crafting system is actually it's kind of fun. So, anyways, part of this is about adaptation studies, and part of that is asking the question of like, what does it mean to have fidelity to something, or how do you contextualize fidelity? It's not necessarily saying like the source text is always this privileged authority, but
Or even a unique authority.
really, yeah. But you wind up with these really strange situations, especially with games. So, like, Linda Hutchin wrote a theory of adaptation. She talks a lot about why, like, kind of the attitudes that go into adaptation, and a lot of what she argues is you don't really need to worry about fidelity to the source text, but just sort of like, what does that wind up? What does that mean ultimately to be like? How do you contextualize that, especially when you look at like how ravenous fandoms are, with fan fiction getting, I don't know if you want to say more legitimacy, but it's having more and more of an impact, especially when you look at the stuff that Tumblr's doing, right?
Yeah, you got stuff Tumblr's doing. You also have is Kindle Worlds still even a thing?
Kindle
Or
Worlds.
yeah, it was Kindle's. It was Amazon's attempt to like allow people to sell their fan fiction for specific fandoms that allowed it.
Oh,
Yeah, so it was like lending this capitalist legitimacy to fan fiction.
huh. Uh,
Weirdly,
I did not. I did not know that. I knew like I have some author friends who are selling stuff just through Kindle, and that seems to be
yeah.
doing okay for them.
Yeah, you can do that for public domain works. What was it? The Beekeeper's Apprentice. Very. I don't know if I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's um,
I've not.
it's a Sherlock Holmes, arguably self-insertion
Huh.
fan fiction, where this woman like meets Sherlock Holmes, and then they solve mysteries together and like battle Moriarty's daughter, and
Great.
yeah,
All right. Yeah. So like on the one hand, you want to say that fidelity to the main source doesn't matter, but on the other hand, there's a certain cultural force that's kind of pressing in against you. It is a thing that has an impact. It carries a certain level of weight that sort of interacts with that process. You look at plenty of stuff kind of came out surrounding the Peter Jackson trilogy where fans really liked Orlando Bloom, so therefore he showed up more in the later movies, and so just sort of the reactions like that. So part of the things again what we've been doing here is looking at just a huge wide range, a very wide definition of roguelike games. Everything from NetHack to oh damn it, I should have opened up NetHack. Well, it's just a quick thing that we can just talk about briefly rather than actually boot up NetHack because that's the only one thing.
Then we'll be there all night.
Yeah. Well,
let's not kid ourselves.
So we put everything from like NetHack to very liberal definitions of the term roguelike, like Realm of the Mad God. I would say that at a certain point we should probably Teleglitch. We should probably take a look at Sunless Sea. They just added randomized maps to the game. It's still early access, but they're the Fallen London people, and they do an interesting like interactive fiction crossed with sort of a roguelike type thing. And I don't know, their writing is very charming. So
and oh shoot, what was the one? We're gonna whenever. What was that one that with the revolver? One.
Oh, Receiver.
Receiver.
Yeah. So that Receiver was just like you have procedurally generated weapons and stuff like that. And so part of what we're looking at is trying to construct a sort of, or at least enact a sort of video game studies genre theory, based out of kind of my scattered readings and just all right, let's just take a run at all these different games and see if we start noticing convergences and commonalities. And trying to find something to say about them, ideally in the fly, like kind of off the cuff, rather than come to it with some preconceived notions. But I mean, my website is Rap Game Back Teen, so like I have my own set of assumptions that I inevitably have to make. And part of it, I think, is what I've been looking at is sort of assemblage theory, the idea that there are. When you start looking at a game, you're looking at a network of things that all sort of interface with one another, and that these things interact in ways that may not even be completely rational. And you may be talking about like objects acting on a person, and these things can be, these objects or parts of the assemblage are both like material and expressive, and these things are kind of inextricable. So part of it is looking at these things and sort of how do these interactions either stabilize the whole of this assemblage or destabilize it. And so when you start looking at adaptations, the idea of fidelity and like how does a fandom interact with a video game, interact with Lord of the Rings, and how does this thing either destabilize that relationship or stabilize it. And that's kind of just a couple of the broad things, but the idea that for me, especially looking at older games or free games or open source games where they pass from hand to hand, they at a certain point, one of the major ethos, one of the major ethical concerns with a lot of roguelike development is making sure your code is open source and allowing others to kind of play with it. And at that point, you start having these strange variants that kind of are adaptations themselves. And if you look at, the roguelike genre as being ostensibly everything is adapted from some of the basic mechanics of Rogue, which is procedurally generated maps, permanent death, and sort of a more hazily defined labyrinth aspect to it, which is more like a sense of descending into something unknown. either through opaque mechanics or yeah, something like that. I think that seems to be our working definition.
Yeah, yeah, let's yeah, we could get into the Berlin interpretation all we want, but I think we should just encourage you to Google the Berlin interpretation
Yeah,
before we
well,
do this.
yeah. Part of what I
Yeah.
like about the Berlin interpretation, which is a definition that the roguelike community kind of came up with themselves in 2008, is they list a whole bunch of different mechanics, and they say these mechanics have to be here for this thing to be, or to for us to be able to evaluate how roguelike a thing is. But they don't necessarily, they just list them. They don't necessarily talk about them as a relational aspect. And for me, I
Right.
think what I've taken from assemblage theory and some of Baktine's writings, the idea of like heteroglossia, is that it's not necessarily the discrete items themselves. In fact, they can't even be discrete. Like they can't be
Right.
one like separate. They have to be. It's how they relate to one another, and how that relationship kind of defines that game, and how it kind of crafts that experience, which is part of why it's so important for us to first of all try to play the games, but also keep these things in mind, and like look at how they kind of play with some of these mechanics, and push back against them or destabilize what the game means, or whether that like the game itself is fine, and then it's just more it problematizes a definition. So yeah.
So
Well,
Moria.
yeah. There's with that mouthful, we were presented with this page of Moria, which was it was created by Robert Owen Konecki,
Oh, Alan Konecki and
Koeneke.
Jimmy Wayne Todd, two jerks from the University of Oklahoma.
Right. And so I found just before we went live, I actually found a Usenet post from Konecki saying, like, just talking about the origin of Moria. And so Rogue came out in about 1980, I think, thereabouts.
Ish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like very early 80s. And he worked at a university and was playing this game. And then he wound up transferring to a different department and didn't have access to the computer, and therefore decided to make his own roguelike because he couldn't play the original Rogue. Which, when you start talking about the reasons for adapting something, that's not necessarily one that you wind up coming across. And he went with a Lord of the Rings theme for it. So this in this case it is the Mines of Moria. Again, this is also carrying like when you go back to Rogue as being heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons itself codifying certain narrative aspects of Lord of the Rings. When you start talking
Yeah.
about these RPGs, it kind of gets they have this sort of strange aura of Lord of the Ringsness that's kind of
Yeah.
inescapable.
Yeah, you wind up with the degrees of Lord of the Rings almost like
Mm-hmm.
um you get Diablo, which lends itself to, owes a lot of its mechanics to various roguelikes, which a lot of which owe themselves to NetHack, which owes itself to Rogue, which owes itself to Lord of the Rings, which probably in part owes itself to Norse myth, and then
Yeah. And actually, Diablo specifically, I think the creators pointed to Moria and Angband as their primary influence, because you have small town on top of a massive
mm,
dungeon. So again, the original Moria was created. It was written in Pascal and kind of
ugh,
couldn't be ported anywhere else. So like you already have this weird contested authorship here, because the version that we're playing, Konecki probably didn't really have any specific hand in porting it to Unix. That was James E. Wilson at
mm,
UC Berkeley. And in point of fact, Moria didn't really kind of start hitting, like connecting with other fans until about 1988, which was when it was ported to Unix and then was released on DOS, Amiga, and whatever. Um,
computers people actually use.
yeah, basically. So, anyways, without further ado, so you have your standard human, half elf, halfling, gnome, dwarf, half orc, and half troll. Um, all right, let's go with halfling here. Female halfling, because there are so few of those in Tolkien's universe.
Yeah.
You are one of several children of a halfling homeowner. You are a well-liked child. You have hazel eyes, straight brown hair, and a dark complexion. Uh, so even this, like the character background, I think is randomly generated. Um, let's just accept the characteristics. And it already were kind of more complicated than Rogue was because Rogue only had one class.
Rogue.
Yeah, let's go with Rogue. Let's have a gender bent Glorfindel. All right. So here we go. We've got our stats along the left-hand side. We've got several buildings. I have not looked up any of the commands for this, so this will go great. I hit this filthy street urchin.
Oh wait, yeah, I'm running on a delay from.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you're right. I did not do a screen share with you, did I?
Yeah, that would be. Begs you for money, touches you.
Um, Call. There we go. Share screens. There.
Aha. All right. Much better.
So the filthy street urchin touches you. My purse feels lighter. So they're robbing me. There we go. Give me my money back. They did not give me my money back. Okay.
Class distinctions.
So here we go. We've got Ganat the Greedy, a gnome alchemist, who I can purchase some stuff, but I'm gonna exit out of this building.
Yeah.
So
presumably jacked up his prices.
Yeah. Yeah, look at those prices. That's crazy. Well, I've got 531 gold to start with. I can apparently redraw the screen if I want, but that doesn't seem to be. Holy Book of Prayers, Words of Wisdom, Holy Book of Prayers, Potion of Heroism, a Warhammer.
I'd grab some of the cure wounds potions.
Sure. All right.
That's a cure your serious wounds and cure light wounds are very Dungeons and Dragons trope kind of thing.
I'm going to offer 77. All right.
That's 78. That's a.
All right. Yeah, that seems like a pleasure to do business with you. All right. Cool. I did not expect that. A mangy-looking leper begs me for money.
So what? Why are we descending into the mines of Moria?
It doesn't really give you any explanation as to why you would want to do that.
Like that just seems like a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like, token verse wise.
Yeah.
Unless you needed to.
Yeah. I mean, it gets even weirder when you start looking at like Angband as a version of this, and I can't seem to do anything.
You pass through a one-way door. There's not a room.
No. See no upstate staircase here. Okay. Good job, Moria. Wooden torches?